What's up, Raider fans? Sam Gordon back here with you of Vegas Nation. It is Tuesday, 12 o'clock. That means it is time for the Vegas Nation Fan Zone. I'm here to answer any and all questions you guys have about the Raiders offseason so far, football in general, the NFL, just kind of where everything is at. We're in a little bit of a standstill. There's things happening, but not quite anything super official yet because the new league year hasn't started. It is, however, the first day that NFL teams can start placing their franchise tag on certain players. So there's a lot to kind of watch around the NFL from that standpoint, but not necessarily anything new with the Raiders. So it's all just kind of a holding pattern. It's going to be interesting to see how things kind of shake out as the Raiders work to trim cap space and get ready for a free agency period in which they're going to need to revamp their defense and possibly their offensive line and invest a little bit there. So that is what we are currently waiting on, just kind of seeing who are casualties of the cap and who sticks around. There's already reports, including a Review Journal report, that the Raiders are going to part ways with Tyrell Williams and his $11.6 million salary. The receiver, 28, going on 29 years old, still has a lot of good football left. I think was formerly a 1,000-yard receiver with the Chargers, but just didn't quite work out with the Raiders for injuries. He was banged up a couple years here, and it makes sense that he is not going to complete that contract and the Raiders are going to want to move on. Feels like there will be a market for him, though, because he, again, still only 29 and with 1,000-yard potential. We saw that with the Chargers. Just kind of wait and see with what teams. But the Raiders have a couple, other interesting players to look at cap-wise. They can save $14 million if they cut Trent Brown, or they can try and renegotiate something and bring him back. The big-time right tackle who hasn't necessarily played as consistently as they would have liked him to, only played 16 of the 32 games in the 2 years he was here. All-pro kind of player when he's available, but for the most part, again, not available. Again, he's due $14 million, so they can save a little money that way. Marcus Mariota, $10.7 million cap hit. They already paid off the guarantees. We've seen that the Raiders have been maybe fielding offers. I mean, he's certainly available. I think teams have checked in with the Raiders about what it would take to get Marcus Mariota. But given that he could be a free agent if check. Sorry about that. A little bit of technical difficulties, but we were checking in about we were talking about when the signal cut out about the things that the Raiders can do to trim salary cap space. One of those things would be trading or moving on from Marcus Mariota, who is due to make more than $10 million, $10.7 million already guarantees have been paid out. Of course, you look on the roster, there are other possible, candidates, even though Mariota is a big one. You look at a guy like Richie Incognito, who is set to make $5.475 million or count against $5.475 million. Getting all jumbled. But that's how much he's set to make this year. Going to be 37, 38 years old, coming off of an Achilles injury. What do they do with him? Jalen Richard, the scat back, kick returner, has been a productive player for the Raiders in the past, but wasn't necessarily too productive in 2020. He's due $3.5 million. Is there money to spend elsewhere with him? Obviously, LaMarcus Joyner, only a $2.5 million cap hit if you part ways with him now, as opposed to the 11.2 if he finishes out the season. Or if he's on the roster in the 2021 season. So there are ways that the Raiders can create some flexibility and get under the cap. And I think that's certainly what they need to do if they plan on revamping the defense. A number of big-time free agents across that defensive front that I think they'd be interested in. Or I think, look at a guy like Leonard Williams, maybe a Justin Houston, Dalvin Tomlinson, are a number of players they might go after. And then those are areas I think they're going to look to revamp in the draft as well. So we're kind of just in a holding pattern until more players, until more teams make decisions on players, until more players officially have become free agents and can kind of assess the market. Just based on everything where the salary cap's at, I think we got a hard cap figure of about $180 million, which is going down because of the pandemic. Not necessarily too much of a surprise there that it's going down, but with the cap going down, there's going to be some situations that teams are going to have to work out, and maybe players are going to want to take shorter deals with hope of a cap bump moving forward. So we will see what happens there. Also talk of a Derek Carr extension. There's been some rumors floating around. I don't think anything is imminent or that anything is for sure going to happen, in the immediate future. But for a lot of reasons, I think it makes sense for both parties to get something short-term done. You can lock up a big-time, pretty big-time quarterback, a top 10 quarterback by most metrics, a guy that is at 29, going on 30 years old, entering the prime of his career and coming off of a very, very productive season with the Raiders. You can lock him up before that market resets with possible extensions to Dak Prescott and Josh Allen and Lamar Jackson. Those guys are going to get big-time money that they deserve, and that's going to reset the quarterback money market. And if the Raiders can negotiate something, get that done ahead of time, maybe you beat the market. You're able to come to a fixed price before the market resets itself. You guarantee Derek Carr some money, and you can continue to see what kind of roster you can build around him in the next couple of years, while also freeing up some cap space. So those are a few things worth, I think, monitoring these next few weeks as we get into free agency. If there's any questions, please feel free to write on the YouTube, on the side of the chat. I haven't seen anything so far. So if there's anything my way, we did have some technical difficulties. If there are any questions you guys have or anything I missed, any Raider fans that are participating have, be happy to answer them to the best of my ability. Just kind of an interesting time in the NFL with what's going on. The quarterback market has been wild with the trades to Matthew Stafford and Carson Wentz, with teams feeling like they want to upgrade there. And then, of course, Deshaun Watson, who is a top 3 quarterback, any way you want to look at it, entering the prime of his career, who wants out of a dicey situation in Houston. What's going to happen there? Maybe that's the first domino to fall. Maybe not. Maybe they're in a holding pattern and kind of in a standoff situation there. Now that it's March, we'll see as the season gets closer and closer who takes the stronger stand and who's going to back down. But it feels like just from afar and reading all the reports that Deshaun Watson has dug his feet in and is staying put. From Steve O, is Gus Bradley going to request Gruden hire Merriman? To be honest, I'm not sure. I'm not sure about that, or where he's at with who he wants to hire. We know that he's put some of his defensive staff together in place, and guys with proven track records and pedigrees that have been successful assistant coaches for a long time. I think Merriman would certainly be an interesting addition to the coaching staff, given what he was able to accomplish during his NFL career, kind of how prolific of a player he has, and now that he's some time removed from the game, what he's able to, the kind of the voice he might be able to have in a locker room and things like that. So very, very, very interesting, kind of looking at what he would bring to a coaching staff. But so far with what Gus Bradley has in place, I feel like he has a pretty strong staff in place, guys that have been around a long time and that have garnered a lot of respect at the NFL level. So again, any questions, feel free to fire them my way. Whatever you have, we will do the best to answer them to the best of our ability here with the Raider, with Vegas Nation Fan Zone today. Other needs I think the Raiders have as they continue to build out this team. I think offensive line is going to be something really worth following. For me, the Trent Brown situation is definitely one to monitor, given that what he makes, how much money that the Raiders can possibly open up, and what would they do if they moved on from Trent Brown at right tackle. Is that a situation where you want to go into free agency or you want to go into the draft? So we'll see. It looks like we have a couple questions from Stan Kova. How about this? Raiders trade Marcus Mariota and Trent Brown to the Patriots for whatever they can get from them. I think that's an interesting idea in theory. I'm just from the Patriots perspective. If they hold off and don't trade anything over, there's a good chance, I think, that both these guys are going to be available on the free agent market. Patriots can kind of dip in that way instead of actually giving up capital or draft resources and possibly sign those players. Of course, Trent Brown played with the Patriots and won a Super Bowl in New England. So I think there's some familiarity there, and the Patriots certainly did a good job of helping him play at an all-pro level, and he rewarded them with strong play on that right side of that offensive line before getting his big deal with the Raiders the last couple of years. So I imagine that the Raiders are probably kicking the tires, and other teams are kicking the tires and seeing who's going to be available. But if you're from the Patriots perspective, if these guys are going to be free agents, or if the Raiders can't find a trade destination, maybe you're banking on that, and you can go out there and sign those guys as free agents. Actually, the Patriots need a wide receiver. Can we interest them in a Tyrell Williams as well? The Patriots have cap space, and I could take conditional picks. I think, of course, the Raiders would take conditional picks, but because of his contract is so big, and given that 29 years old, We haven't really seen him put together a full season the last couple of years. With that in mind, would you want to actually give up draft resources to take on this big contract for a guy that we haven't seen produce in a couple of years? I don't think that makes a lot of sense either when they can just kind of tap in on the free agency market. Correct, Steve-O. He is already released. I was responding in as diplomatic of a way as possible to Stan Kova's question about the Patriots needing a wide receiver and taking on Tyrell Williams. It's not happening because it doesn't make sense financially. There's too much money there for any team to trade for somebody making that kind of money who we haven't seen that kind of production from, and of course the injuries. So that they are going to create cap space, releasing Tyrell Williams, and they're going to create a lot of it. He was due to make $11.6 million this season. All of the guarantees have been paid off. There is no dead cap, so that is a hearty amount of money that the Raiders were able to create in terms of cap space for a player that really hasn't contributed to his capabilities because of injuries the last couple of seasons. So again, feel free to keep the questions coming. Again, I think the offensive line situation is worth monitoring. What are they going to do if Trent Brown moves on? Do you draft somebody in the first, second, or third round? Do you mine the free agent market? Is there somebody via trade? Maybe there's a situation where a team can't agree on a contract extension with somebody at that position who's valuable. And then also from the guard spot with Richie Incognito, I would think, no, I don't know this, but I would think given that he's going to be 38 and coming off of a devastating injury, a season-ending injury, that it would make sense for the Raiders and him to move on, part ways. That would open up some cap space. Is John Simpson, the going to be second-year guard out of Clemson, ready to take that leap and become a starting player? I think he got a cup of coffee this year, struggled a little bit to the NFL level, which is understandable because he was a rookie and these things take time. But how much has he developed in this offseason? Is he ready to step in and be that starter, be that anchor on the offensive line alongside Rodney Hudson? Jay Thiggs with a question. In your best guess between 1 through 5, what is the likelihood we re-sign Nelson Aguilar? I think I would say probably, if you ask me to rate, I would say maybe a 3.5 or a 4. I think there's mutual interest there. He was in a big-time role with the Raiders, the guy who kind of emerged as that number one receiver, that real deep threat, and was able to have a career season. But based on what he was able to put forward, there are going to be other suitors as well. It all depends on the contract and if it makes sense for both teams. Of course, Aguilar is going to want fair value and deserves that, earned that after the way he played. And the Raiders also have position considerations elsewhere. He was a bargain. Definitely outperformed his contract last year. That was around $1 million. Probably something in the $8 to $10 million range or $7 to $9 million range is what he's probably due. And something short term, something that both sides can come to an agreement. I think it would make sense because he was a big focal part of the team here in Vegas. Not necessarily sure that would be the case elsewhere, as a lot of teams already have established number one wide receivers. What if Maina 909 asked, what if we don't sign Aguilar? Will we try to pick up another wide receiver? I think it would definitely create a need if Aguilar doesn't come back for obvious reasons, just based on how productive he was. Now, they have young receivers. You have a Henry Ruggs and a Bryan Edwards that the Raiders are invested in developing. You take Ruggs in the first round and Edwards in the third round. You want those guys to become big parts, big contributors on this offense. But at the same time, do you feel comfortable going into the 2021 season without an established number one kind of veteran type wide receiver? There's a lot of big time receivers on the market this year. You have a guy like Juju Smith-Schuster, where there have been rumors, Raiders rumors there. You have somebody like a Marvin Jones who's been big time and maybe wants to move on to the Rams to go play with his former quarterback Matthew Stafford. We're not sure. Allen Robinson is one of the best receivers in the NFL in his prime at 28. But I think there are more pressing needs than receiver for the Raiders if Aguilar walks because of how good Darren Waller is. Even though he's technically a tight end, he is, I think, a number one offensive skill position player in most offenses in the NFL. I think he's right up there in terms of uncoverableness or how hard he is to cover with the top guys in the league. And we saw that play itself out over the last 5 or 6 weeks of the season when the Raiders completely unleashed him and he was able to do whatever he wanted. So that would mitigate having him in the prime of his career under contract would mitigate the loss of a Nelson Aguilar, but it would certainly be worth mining the receiver market if Nelson Aguilar walks and finds a new situation. Steve-O thinks the Raiders make a run at Juju, and I listen, it depends on kind of, again, what the market is, but Juju was a big-time receiver in the NFL. I mean, he's had a 1,400-yard season, and he now has a couple years of experience being the number one guy and understanding the difficulties and the nuances and the subtleties of being the number one receiver. It wasn't quite as productive, But as we saw in that playoff game against the Cleveland Browns, is still a heck of a player, and he is still capable of big-time explosive production in massive games and capable of carrying that number one kind of load, even if he hasn't been able to duplicate that 2018 season that he had when he was playing alongside Antonio Brown. So he is definitely somebody worth monitoring, and I think there are other teams in the NFL that are going to be interested in him too for obvious reasons. Also, he's only 24, really experienced player, but still super young and a lot of upside and a lot of room for growth. So somebody worth kind of following where he goes. Kev Araki says the receivers are good enough. I think for the most part, the offensive skill position guys are good enough because of Waller, because of Darren Waller and his unique ability to line up all over the field, create matchup problems, and put pressure on opposing defenses. When you have somebody like that, you don't have to have necessarily a big-time number one-ish type receiver, even though you would want that. And I think the Raiders are hoping that Henry Ruggs and Bryan Edwards take a step forward in production and enroll this upcoming season because, again, that would mitigate some of the losses if a Nelson Aguilar chooses to move on. Elsewhere, it would mitigate those losses and allow the Raiders to allocate financial resources into the defense and in the areas where they really need an improvement. As far as who are you talking about, Kev, being a slot? Juju? Keep the questions coming, y'all. We have a few more minutes. Happy to continue to answer questions or give perspective where I feel fit. So keep everything coming. It's going to be, in my estimation, an interesting offseason, one of the most unprecedented. It already is based on the movement we've seen at the quarterback position around the NFL. But because of the effects of the pandemic and the financial situations that teams are in, I think it's super fascinating to monitor what teams make concessions and what players make concessions and what ends up happening, because some of these long-term deals I think we would normally see, we're not going to necessarily see because the money's just not there. So there are going to be a lot of big-time players that are in situations where they can maybe earn a quick payday, short-term kind of deal, or teams, big-time players, maybe taking less money to go play in a contender, play on a contender and try and boost their stock. I don't know, because it's so unprecedented with how low the cap is running, or how low the cap is expected to go. Steve-O says Micah Parsons in terms of the draft situation. I think he would certainly, based on his pedigree and how good he is as a player and what he was able to accomplish at Penn State. I don't know if linebacker is necessarily the most pressing need, but he certainly is a kind of player. I mean, I don't think the Raiders are necessarily in any position. If there's a big-time defensive player, I think you go best player available in the draft on the defensive side of the ball. And if he fits that criteria, you have a three-down linebacker that can really do anything and make plays all over the field. Steve-O says, see my above Juju comment in regards to Kev. Appreciate the clarity. Yeah, I mean, Juju's played in the slot, but he's also played, all over. And I think if you give a guy big money and expect him to be a number one-ish or number two type receiver, you expect him to be able to be multidimensional enough to play in different spots in the field. Justin Jefferson with the Vikings, for example, was a slot in college and figured out how to play all over the field in the NFL. Juju would, in theory, have the skill set that dictates that he can play all over. Kev doesn't believe Parsons will fall to the Raiders. I think I'd be surprised if he does too. He's such a big time player that is capable of so much that he's going to go higher in the draft. But we'll see. If he does, he would be a dynamite pick. With that said, going to wrap up now. Those are my thoughts. Just kind of now about the course of the season. I'm Sam Gordon. I will be with you soon. Thanks again for watching.